So an important part of chemistry is learning how to make measurements and also knowing how to do an experiment. And that really boils down to what we call the scientific method. So in the scientific method, the way you learn it in books is like, oh, we make a hypothesis and then we make an experiment to test the hypothesis and then we look at the results. Well, in reality, most of the time, um, what happens is we make an observation. Maybe not even doing an experiment. We make an observation in nature, and then we, from that, make a hypothesis, and then we design an experiment to test the hypothesis, and then from that, we go through a series of cycles of testing hypothesis, right? Re-hypothesizing after we do the experiment, and then going through a circle until we come up with a theory, and eventually maybe we can come up with a law of some sorts. And you'll learn about that hopefully in your classes from before, or you've learned about it this week in this first week of class. So what we're going to do, instead of actually doing something like go out and make some profound observation of nature, we're just going to start by making cookies. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a cookie recipe, and then we're going to make changes in the cookie recipe, and then we're going to see how that affects the outcome of the cookie. Now, the deal is this: a hypothesis has to be testable, and so we need to come up with, in order to evaluate whether or not what we did was good or bad, is a different way of quantitatively evaluating the quality of the cookie, right? So we're gonna have a grading scale on one side. We have a recipe, right? We're gonna make a cookie, we're gonna try it, and maybe it'll taste good, but maybe we want to make it better. And that's our goal, is to make a better cookie, right? So then what we're gonna do is take this recipe and say, well, I think, our hypothesis, right? I think that maybe there's too much butter, or maybe there's not enough flour, or there's too much sugar, or maybe we need more molasses. And I'll give you the base recipe for cookies. We'll all start in the same place, right? And then we'll say, I think if I make this change, it will have an effect on such and such. And then we'll go ahead and make that recipe. It's like a very short experiment. It only takes like 30 minutes to make the cookies themselves. And then we'll test it out. We'll see, like, well, did it make it better? And we'll have other people evaluate our cookies. I'd like you to work in groups. I know this is gonna happen during this first week when maybe you don't know anyone, or there's a lot of other things going on in this first week. It might be a little more difficult, but I'd like you to work in pairs, save on resources a little bit. And then we'll get together in class and we'll talk about, like, oh yeah, that was a great change, or that was a horrible change. Maybe we should change it the other way, or maybe we should change something else, right? And because there's enough of you, like we have a large group, we could have 10 different kinds of changes to see how it affects. And another thing that I'd like to be able to do is, this is the recipe that I created this summer, is just a plain cookie recipe. There's nothing special about it other than it has a lot of molasses in it, which I like, okay? It would be to add something to it besides like chocolate chips, because we always add chocolate chips to cookies, and we all know what a chocolate chip cookie tastes like, which is maybe not a bad thing, but maybe we want to make our own thing, right? So what we're gonna have to do, though, in order to do this experiment quantitatively, here's a stick of butter. Now it's already soft, so I gotta hold it kind of gently. But there's a stick of butter. Focus, yeah, there's the butter. It's just wanting to focus on my face. If you wanna make a change in the amount of butter, you could do it in tablespoons. But it turns out, like, if you wanna do a change in flour, let's see if it'll show this. Here's flour. Put it right by my face so it focuses well. All right, that's flour. Let's say you want to do 30% more flour. Well, if the original recipe called for 1 1/4 cups of flour, you have to have the right measuring device to do 30% more of 1 1/4, right? So what we're gonna do instead is we're gonna do what they do in a lot of commercial kitchens and a lot of bread making, is we're just gonna use a scale. But most recipes that you deal with every day are not done in grams. We're not going to do it in pounds. We're going to do it like in metric system, SI units. So we're going to use it in grams, but we need conversions for all these things. Now you can go on YouTube and look these things up, but I'll tell you, like when you get flour from one place and flour from another place, they weigh differently. Okay, they'll have a different density. It depends on the type of flour, how it's milled, how much moisture is in the flour. Same thing is true of salt. There's like cheapo table salt, right? And then there's the really fancy stuff that my kids buy for, I don't know what reason, but anyways, it's fancy, which means it costs more. It has very different density. Table salt basically has a density of rocks because it's a mineral, right? Minerals that's where you get our minerals from, is from the ground. So, but the fancy ones are flaky and powdery, and so they have a different density. So, but it's all sodium chloride. It's all the same material. And how much sodium chloride you get, it really depends on the weight, not on the volume. So a lot of recipes will use grams. Now, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take whatever your household ingredients are, and we're gonna weigh them and make our own unit conversions so that we know how many grams of each ingredient we have inside the recipe. So that's kind of the introduction. I'll give you the recipe, not on the first day. I'll give it to you probably on the second day of the experiments. The first day, what you're gonna be doing is what I'm gonna be showing you right here. It is how to create unit conversion tables for the ingredients that you have at your house, or if you don't have them at your house, go out and buy them. They're not really expensive, and if you can't afford it, like this is my molasses bottle. I have 2 of them. I will loan you some molasses. I have a ton of it. It makes for really good cookies, by the way. So that's what we're gonna be doing tonight in video. I had to wait for everybody to go to sleep, so that's what I said tonight. And the dogs, there's like a puppy and 2 other dogs and 4 cats. The fish are pretty quiet, but still, there's a lot of noise in my house. So we're late at night, cooking in the kitchen, and I want to show you how to convert everything in a recipe to grams. The only thing we're not going to do, and it kind of bothers me that we're not, is eggs. Like in a large kitchen, you might add a dozen eggs to a recipe, right? Or a gross, which is 12 dozen, 144. They probably base that on weight too. I don't know, I don't cook at that scale. But definitely, like when you're doing breads, we do grams for a lot of different things when we're making breads. And so that's what we're gonna do with this cookie recipe. It'll make it easier for us to make changes to the recipe and be quantitative about how we make the changes. Okay, so what I'm gonna show you how to do is to measure how much a cup of flour weighs, or a half cup. I decided I would use a half cup because it uses a little less flour, but also it'll illustrate the point a little bit better. So this is a scale. It's what we call it in the kitchen. It's a kitchen scale. In the labs, we would call this a balance. And so one of the things you have to learn about these kitchen scales is that they have a unit. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but the unit on that one is grams. And this is 0.00. Now, I'm gonna show you something. If I hold this thing directly over, you can't see the numbers because of the polarizing nature of the film on the screen. So I do have to hold it at this angle so you can see it. So sorry, it makes the decimal point really hard to read. So this thing reads to 1/100th of a gram. Oh, you'll also notice there's a lot of fluctuation going on in here, and that's because actually I have my whole house fan on and the wind is blowing. So you might want to avoid some of those things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a half a cup of flour in this measuring cup. Now this is known as a dry measure because this is what we usually measure dry goods in. So what I'm going to do is show you how to do this properly. The first thing is we're going to be taking notes, so you'll want to have a pen handy and a notebook, okay? Now, because this video, it's a lot easier to read if I use a Sharpie marker. I'm using a big fat Sharpie marker. But I'm going to do flour. Doesn't have to be real neat. And I'm going to do 0.5, and then I'm going to assume at least 2 sig figs on the flour. I could be wrong. Cups, that's the measure. And then what I'm going to do is record the weight of the flour here that I get for half a cup. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. One is I can put this cup on here empty, and I could write down this number, 74.5, and then it looks like it's somewhere between 4 and 9. I saw a 4 there, that's a 6. So what's between 6 and 9? Probably 74.5, 7 or 8. So we can use any one of those. This is that cup is 74.5. It looks like it's staying on the 6, so I'll stay with the 6 for now. Okay, grams, I'll write the unit down. So this is the empty mass, and now what I have to do is I have to fill the measuring cup up. And so what I'm gonna do is dip it into my flour, and I'm gonna get more than half a cup. And then what you do is you take a knife like this, and you scrape back on it like this to fill it. And then you scrape off the excess. Let me tilt this down so you can see it. You scrape off the excess into another container. Let me see if I can do this by looking through the camera. And use the back, oh shoot, see that? Use the back of a kitchen knife to do this. And then I just had this bowl here for practicing with a camera. And that is, yeah, half a cup of flour. Now what I'm gonna do, the tricky part with the camera and everything, is I'm gonna stick this on here. And I'll read that number off, and that is 147. And it looks like, let's see what it does, 147.69. So now I can write that down as 147.69 grams. So let's think about what this is, right? We're gonna do this weight of flour by difference. Sorry about the angle there. So I can take 147.69 and subtract the mass of the measuring cup. And then I can calculate the mass of the flour. So let's see, what's that gonna come out to? That'll be 31.37, like that. So 73 point, and you better check that with a calculator, 73.13 grams. Now, like I said, depending on where your flour's milled and how it's milled, it's gonna have slightly different densities. It also depends on how fluffed up your flour is. So I'm gonna go for my recipe that a half a cup is equal to 73.13 grams. So 1/2, like that if you wanna do it, or you can do 0.500 cups is equal to 73.13 grams. Now, when you get a recipe that has a value in cups, what you can do is you can use that to make a change in, convert the cups into grams, and then you can just measure everything out. So now instead of using a measuring cup to do your recipe, all you have to use is a spoon and spoon in the weight until you have the right weight. So let me show you how you might do that with the flour. So I will just pretend I'm gonna get another small bowl. Let's say the recipe, see if I had a cameraman, he would have followed me on that, calls for half a cup. There's my measuring, or my bowl for getting my flour. I'm gonna tear that out. Then I just take a spoon and I spoon the flour in until I get to 73.13 grams. And I'm gonna go ahead and do that real quick. And I don't know if you notice, I teared the bowl out because I don't care about the weight of the bowl, so I just teared the bowl out this time. And that's an option for you. And there, I'm done measuring. Now, it's not exactly the amount that I needed, but it's very close. It's within a couple of percent at the worst. In fact, I think it's much closer than a couple of percent. And now I just add that to my bowl that I'm going to use for my ingredients, okay? So that's why one of the advantages of having weights is you don't have to have a lot of tools. All you have to have is a scale and a couple of bowls that you can measure stuff out that you need. You can do the same thing. The recipe will call for sugar. I'll show you part of it on the camera here. All right. It's going to call for an amount of butter. It's going to call for an amount of sugar. It's going to call for an amount of molasses. It's going to have an amount of salt. So we're going to do this for all of these different ingredients, and then you'll come up with conversion tables. And then I'll make a little video to show you the proper order to mix these things the way we traditionally do this for making cookies. I did think of one other thing I forgot to mention. I don't know if you're not familiar with cooking. This is what's written on the side of a package of butter. So if you want to do this, what you have to do when you're cooking, you typically say, oh, I need half a cup of butter, let's say. Then what you do is you would use the whole stick. But if you needed a third of a cup, you would actually cut it right here, and this would be a third of a cup. If you need a quarter of a cup, you'd cut it right here, and that would be a quarter of a cup. But you notice how the wrapper is on this? It's all shifted off in one direction. So it turns out this happens a lot when butter gets wrapped. So you always have to kind of guess where the half is, the quarter is. And, you know, maybe you don't care about that detail, but, you know, if you're a scientist, sometimes you care about these things. So what we're going to do is we're going to weigh this butter outside of its wrapper. So let me give you a piece of advice. When you're doing this and you're weighing the butter, this is room temperature butter. It's super soft, right? Freeze the butter before you do it. Take it out of the wrapper and weigh it on something, and it's a lot less messy, and there's a lot less butter that sticks to the wrapper, and so you don't have to worry about errors caused by that. So freeze it, or at least take it straight out of the fridge and use it. It doesn't have to be completely frozen, but stick it in the freezer for like 15 minutes, and it'll be a lot easier to take out. And then you can let this soften inside of a bowl, unlike I did, which I foolishly just took it out for this video, and now I have to stick it back in the fridge so I can do stuff with it. All right, so let's go through the process of how we put this recipe together. Now, I've measured a bunch of stuff out already. For example, the molasses needs to be about 25 grams of this, and I'm not going to tell you how much the flour and the other so far, because that's some of the things you're going to be figuring out. Here's a baking soda, salt, and flour, and these are the things we sort of pre-mix these things together, because if you mix it in with any of the liquids, they tend to clump, right? So I'm going to go ahead and add that to the flour. And you know, you can use a little spatula. A lot of people just use their finger. It's fine. Just make sure your hands are clean. You will bake this and it will pasteurize it, basically sterilize it. And then you just mix that together real good. Now I'm going to set that aside because this goes in now last. The other things that have to come together are the molasses, the sugar, and the butter. And we're using molasses. It turns out if you use brown sugar in recipes, brown sugar is just white granulated sugar with molasses in it. So you actually have control of how much molasses flavor you have in your recipes. And you'll notice what I'm doing is I'm using some of the dry sugar to get the molasses off the sides. And you'll see why I have all these things together, but this creams up real nice with the butter. So I want to get all that molasses off. And if you don't know what molasses tastes like, try it. I think you'll like it. All right, so there's the molasses, and now I need to mix that together, and I'm going to mix that together with the butter. You don't have to have a special thing to do this. I usually just use a fork. For some reason, I'm using a spoon. But it doesn't really matter. You're just trying to mix it together. You're trying to get the molasses to be uniformly distributed. and the sugar kind of just melts into the butter. Almost, if you look at it, almost looks like peanut butter here. Okay. There you go. And you know, you do want this to be fairly uniform. So, you know, just spread it around the bottom of your bowl for a while. And there, that's that. That looks pretty good to me. I see a couple of pockets in here. I guess I had some molasses on the spoon that I didn't get off. I do actually have small spatulas for this kind of thing, but I'll just go ahead and do what, you know, you probably have a knife, like a dinner knife at home. If you don't have one, you know, just get one at the Goodwill store. That's where I get a lot of my stuff. There we go, mix all that in now. There we go. Now, the last ingredients are an egg. Mix that in there. Now, I weighed that just so I could know how much the egg weighed when it went in. Turns out eggs, the different size eggs are a lot different mass. Some of that is shell, and a lot of it is just egg white and egg yolk are just bigger. Okay, so this is what I'm gonna add my flour to. And remember, this is a mixture of flour, baking soda, and salt. And I'll add a little bit in, and I'll mix it around. And you'll see how it starts to come together. If you do too much flour at once, I find that I tend like, I don't know if you saw some of that flour fall out. It's okay if it does. Now it looks really a lot like peanut butter, right? And I'll tell you, when you see this, this is how your first recipe will come out. By the way, one of the reasons the recipe is the size it is I didn't want you to make so many cookies that you every day had like 2 dozen cookies or 3 dozen cookies that you had to somehow get rid of. And I don't want you eating, cookies are great, but I don't want you eating that many cookies. So what I'm doing now is just gonna mix this together until it comes together. Honestly, you know, I might even use my hands at this point, but sometimes cookies need a little bit of moisture. You can add milk for moisture. But sometimes you really don't need any, and this is one of those recipes that just doesn't need any. So this is a basic cookie dough recipe. I think the only real variation of a cookie dough recipe like this is just not to add the molasses if you don't like the molasses. Pretty sure the raw egg won't kill you. You can probably eat this, but yeah, making a video. So make sure you cook all your food and wash things before you eat. All right, so that's what that looks like. Right now, we're going to put this on a cookie tray. Now, I'll get a cookie tray out. I like to use some parchment paper, and a parchment paper is really like a paper you can stick in the oven and bake, and that way you don't have to grease the pan at all. I mean, you could, but you don't really have to. One of the things I might recommend that you do is try to make all your cookies the same size. Okay. Now when I cook this, you'll see it has some problems as far as a cookie goes. Tastes great. It's just not a great cookie. Again, too, you have to think about if you add like, let's say you add butterscotch chips to this, or you add almonds, or you add walnuts, or you add different things like that. The consistency needs to be like this in order to have the right texture when you're done, okay? If you try to make it too dry, then it won't turn out good. Now, I'm just dropping these cookies. You could form them into balls, but it turns out, I don't know if you can see how sticky this dough is. It probably doesn't have enough flour, or maybe it has too much butter, or maybe it has too much sugar. These are all things that you could test out. This, in principle, makes a dozen really large cookies. Yeah, but it's going to be a mess when we're done. Now, I'll give you some baking instructions that are a little bit more detailed, I suppose. But these are supposed to cook at about 375 for somewhere around 9 to 11 minutes. It just really depends on your oven. If you have a convection oven, lower that temperature by 25 degrees. If you don't have a convection oven, or you don't know what kind you have, it's probably not a convection oven. Yeah, that tastes really good. So that's how you put it together. It's pretty simple. It takes just a few minutes. It's gonna be 10 minutes in the oven, 11 minutes in the oven. You should keep track of that. Yeah, and that'll be your cookie, okay? Now, the butter I used was salted in this video, but I really would think that you should start with unsalted butter. The only difference between the two butters is the salt, and so you have a little bit more control over that. But I'll bake these up, and if I have a chance, I'll bring them in tomorrow, and you can try them, see how they are. But you'll have to make them yourselves to see if you can match that kind of cookie. I guess that's all I have for this video. Let me shut the recording. Well, there they are. And before I say anything else, I forgot to put the vanilla in these. I think they probably still taste okay, but the vanilla does make them a lot better. Anyways, yeah, they don't look quite right. Let these cool completely before you try to eat them. Yeah, and let's try to make a better cookie. All right, sounds good.